But spring training is just a couple of weeks away, and it is great to reconnect with David J. at Mad Friars. They've been doing it for 20 years. It's an amazing resource for Padres fans, madfriars.com. And David J. back with us right now, Jon and Jim, San Diego Sports 760. So, David, we appreciate it. We're looking forward to 2025. There's a lot of places we can go, obviously, minor leagues and major leagues. Just on these prospect rankings that are coming out right now, we saw ESPN.com. We've seen Baseball America. We see Leo DeVries and Ethan Salas among these top prospects in baseball. What do you make of it? I think Salas in Baseball America was in the 30s among the top 100 prospects. Kylie McDaniel today had him as the 22nd best prospect in baseball. What do you make of where Salas is today compared to maybe when he entered the organization a year and a half ago or so?
Yeah, good to talk to you guys. Thanks for the chance to hop on. Yeah, and you look at it right now, and you hit it on the head. The Baseball America's got Ethan at 31 and Leo DeVries at 18, whereas you turn it around and Keith Law's got them almost exactly flip-flopped with Salas at 17 and DeVries at 31. Kylie's for his ESPN rating somewhere in the middle there. So, what you're seeing is that both of these guys are clearly held in high regard across baseball. And then you get sort of different reactions to the somewhat underwhelming offensive year Salas had, and how many people think that's a reason to worry, and how many people think that's a blip that's going to be part of his development story. And the best way to tell that is going to be actually using the eyes in 4 weeks here when they're in camp. But I think both of them are getting exactly the sort of attention that you would expect for the players with their pedigrees who've had the 2 years in Salas's case and 1 year in DeVries' case since they signed.
So if Ethan Salas, let's just say hypothetically this year he puts up close to the same numbers he did last year, is that any cause for concern, or is it just like, hey, it's the minors, like you got to look at the little things here, not look at at some numbers that might not be indicative of his overall true talent?
Yeah, I think if the overall production stays where it was last year, that is certainly concerning. Mm-hmm. But the thing with Ethan in particular is you look at the underlying numbers, the swing decisions, the chase rate, the ability to recognize pitches, the quality contact rates, all look good. And in the context of being a kid who's younger than the guy who's almost certainly going to be the number 1 overall pick in this coming summer's draft, and he was doing it at high A, it's not a massive concern. And what you're hearing now from folks is, hey, worst case scenario is he's an elite defensive catcher, which is the sort of thing that gets one a very long career and lots of money in MLB. And, if that's your worst case, if that's your floor, then it's not a bad place to be.
David J. Mad Friars with us right now. We're talking about the catching position with Salas. We saw the signing of Elias Diaz. We had it as part of our open. Is it an indictment on Luis Campusano or not that Diaz and...
Tell me I'm an idiot, David.
And who else? Martin Maldonado,
yeah.
The 38-year-old on the minor league deal. Again, catchers can take longer times to develop. I mean, what role do you see Campusano playing here in 2025 and potentially beyond?
He's in that category of players. You look up the road at Joe Adell, who was an outfielder for the Angels, who was a consensus top 5 player a few years ago and has really struggled to make the transition to the big leagues. So you see that with some players. I think it would be totally unwise of the organization to go into the year assuming, hey, this is going to be the year that Luis figures it out and is able to be a difference maker for us. So having a plan that doesn't rely on that is obviously important for the organization. Is it boy? I mean, is he going to figure it out? The tools are all there. He's a guy who's had trouble, keeping consistency defensively. I think he's a guy who, he's sort of a tough personality to figure out, and he's got a short leash at this point, obviously.
Yeah, and they brought in multiple catchers that we'll probably see this year. David, when you look at the state of the franchise, you obviously know the farm system better than anybody, but when you look at the state of, all right, they need these guys to be good for them, or else this is going to be a problem. How much stock do you put in? Yeah, Salas and DeVries, like, they have to hit it. Do both of them have to hit, in your opinion, or does one of them have to hit, in your opinion? Like, what's your opinion on those two guys going forward here?
I mean, as an organization that has north of $100 million committed to players who are going to be, 38 or older at the start of the next decade, they're going to have guys come through who can be really strong big league contributors. Do they need both of these guys to be superstars? No, it'd sure be nice to have one of them turn out to be a superstar and the other be a longtime big league player. But as much as they need those two guys to hit, they really are going to need some guys to come up and be solid big league contributors in those pre-arbitration years. In some ways, getting Eggy Rosario to be a 2-WAR player for them would be every bit as important as getting, Leo DeVries to be a 6-WAR player. It's not as sexy, but the organization's going to need some of that.
And so outside of DeVries and Salas, the two players that are inside the top 100 list for the Padres, what can you tell us about the other players in the Padres organization? Because they don't just have those two guys. They field a bunch of players. That's it. That's all they have. So what can you tell us about, the other players that are outside the top 100?
Yeah, and I think you've got a sort of core group of pitching prospects that are the next tier in the system. The next three pretty clearly, whatever order you put them in, are the two kids out of last year's draft, Cash Mayfield and Boston Bateman, and then Humberto Cruz, who they signed out of Mexico last February, who they went out to get additional pool space to be able to sign him last year. I think those three guys are very clearly in the mix. And if you talk about pitchers across the game who people haven't seen in minor league action yet, who I think everybody's excited to see, those three names are very much at the top of the list for the system. Then you've got a whole collection of arms, the Henry Baez and Victor Lizarraga and Ryan Bergert and Isaiah Lowe, who are all sort of in at Braden Nett, who all are interesting pitching prospects with some flaws. But again, if you can get to the point where in 2026 you've got some combination of those guys putting up league average or slightly even below league average numbers for 200 innings of starting, that would be a massive help to this organization.
That's really good insight. David J. with Mad Friars with us right now on Jon and Jim. So you see some of these reports out there that maybe they're listing on a Michael King or a Dylan Cease entering their final year of arbitration eligibility. They're free agents after 2025. From your seat, the payroll constrictions they're dealing with, the organization major and minor league. Could you justify it? Is there something to be said for potentially moving one of those starting pitchers here prior to 2025? Could that be beneficial or not from your seat?
Obviously the answer is it depends on what you get back. To me, I think they'd be better positioned if they could move Arias and Suarez and get a couple of pieces back. I think if you're looking to shave $20 million out of payroll, that then allows you to go out and still sign, one of the free agent first basemen who's out there, or a couple of players at that $5 million a year range, 5 to 7. I think they're probably better positioned to be able to do that than they are to backfill if they trade off one of those starting pitchers. But, again, it really depends. It's pretty clear that nobody outside the front office, and maybe not within the front office, really knows what the number for this year is. So, all of the answers are based on, it depends on what you can get back, and it depends on what you're actually allowed to spend this year.
Yeah, good point.
Makes sense.
Yeah. What was your opinion on the Profar contract? Too much, lower than what you thought, or just about right?
I mean, I said coming into the offseason that if you looked at the top 100 free agents across the game, the two I had the hardest trouble figuring out a number on were the two Padres, were Profar and Kim.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot to suggest that the underlying, that the jump in performance for Profar last year was real. And there's literally nobody with a career profile like his who, did better at 34 than at 31. And so, I think it's a reasonable number for him to have gotten. I think it would have been a number, again, for the Padres that would have been hard to get to.
Yeah, for the Padres,
yeah, I think it's the two things can be true theory, which is like it's fair, but it doesn't necessarily mean the Padres were in the market of adding $14 million per year for Profar. Okay, it's good for Profar. I don't know if it's good for the Padres, but they didn't have that money. I mean, when they look at their needs, it's a lot of money. But especially with what they're dealing with. I mean, we think they might be shedding payroll. So are you really adding? I mean, they paid him $1 million last year.
Yeah, if they're going to arbitration with Michael King,
are you really?
They're not going to pay 14 a year for Profar or Kim and give up those long-term contracts.
Real quick, David, on that before you go, what do you make of that? I mean, they haven't gone to arbitration with a player under Preller. There's reportedly a $1.475 million difference between the Padres and King. What do you make of this potentially going to arbitration?
I think King, to some extent, answered the question when he did that appearance on Corey Kluber's podcast, whenever that was, 2 weeks ago now. Mm-hmm. That he's sort of a unique profile. The way arbitration works is you're really comparing you're looking for the most direct comparables. And for a guy who, spent the first 4 years as a swingman reliever and only really emerged as a starter last year, there just aren't any of those. And so, he certainly recognized why there could be a gap there. What do I make of it as I don't know that I'd read too much into it being a bigger statement about, the state of the world, either for Preller or the ownership situation. And, while they have been a file and trial organization, at least theoretically, there's nothing to say that they wouldn't actually figure something out before they go to the hearings, which will be in a couple of weeks.
Sure. David, always appreciate it, man. We're excited for baseball coming up in a couple of weeks. David J. And again, for our listeners, you got to get to Mad Friars. Just a terrific resource for San Diego Padres fans. So thank you, David. We'll do it again soon, all right?
Absolutely. Good to talk to you guys.
Great stuff from David J. On the other side, back to the report that Dylan Cease or Michael King could be on the move this offseason. That's next here on Jon and Jim. 6 p.m. We're reacting to a report that came out this afternoon that states the Mets' interest in both Dylan Cease and Michael King. They've had talks, according to this report, for both King and Cease. Atlanta has been involved as well. And it confirms what Ken Rosenthal reported earlier in the week, that the Padres are listening on both King and Cease. Is this a smoke fire situation? Like, is this an inevitability that either Dylan Cease or Michael King moves? Maybe that's too far, an inevitability, but between King, Cease, Arise, Suarez, is that an inevitability? One of those players moves between now and opening day?
Dude, you said it.
I've been saying it. I kind of feel that way.
That there's going to be a cost-cutting move at some point. Because
seems like it.
How could you just be like, okay, we're going to keep this team as it is? They still need to add pieces too. Like, they are not done yet. Not even close to a finished product.
Right.
Unless they truly are going to just say, hey, Brandon Lockridge and Tirso, just go play left field.
Right.
Like, okay, good luck. Their bench is just like who? A bunch of minor league guys, minor league invites.
Yeah, backup catcher. Yep.
Yeah. So if they're going to make other moves, it kind of feels like there can't be those moves made without a cost-cutting move in there. As David J told us a couple minutes ago, and I agree with him, I would much rather have them offload a Robert Suarez. Luis Ariz, I don't know about that one, but I can understand it. You're not going to get much back for Luis Ariz. You're not really going to get much back for Robert Suarez. You'll get a prospect, right?
Mm-hmm.
But to trade away Cease or King, it does feel a little bit like, I'm not going to say punting on the season because you still have good pieces here, but you're not putting your best foot forward. I can tell you that.
Like, what's the adage here? Like, there's no path in a postseason without starting pitching. Now, okay, I saw the Dodgers too, like everyone else. They didn't have a ton of starting pitching this year. Their bullpen worked out beautifully on bullpen days. They rode like Yamamoto and Jack Flaherty kind of as their starters.
Walker
Buehler was in there. You're right.
In their bullpen.
Yeah, in their bullpen. So, okay, I get it. You don't have to have 5 legitimate frontline starters. There's other ways to do it, but
gotta get there first.
But the Padres, and also they only have 3. Cease, King, Darvish is all that's known. Now, I think there's some upside. The Burritos, Vasquez's, Waldrons. There's upside. There probably is, but what you have is like a known commodity. Is you got 3 guys, and to move one of those 3 guys, it better look really good on paper. You better be able to sell it too. Like, this is a business of selling and marketing. You've sold all these tickets. If you move Dylan Cease for 3 dudes we've never heard of that are 20 years old and playing in single and double A, man, I mean, you better be able to sell that. Like, it's marketing too. And I get it. Sometimes you got to move players. They moved Juan Soto. But you're going to move major league players every offseason. It's going to be a tougher and tougher sell. Not just major league players. Soto's going to be in the Hall of Fame. I'm not saying that about King or Cease, but you're moving frontline players on your roster. Like, you're going to sell that to your fan base every offseason. That becomes tougher and tougher.
If you traded, we talked about this. I forget what day you were gone. I don't remember, but there was like a report out there that, the Orioles and Dylan Cease could be a good fit, and some prospects that might make sense.
Yeah.
And I don't think it would happen just because that's a lot for Dylan Cease for 1 year. He's not Juan Soto. Dylan Cease is a good pitcher. Don't get me wrong. Really good pitcher. When he's on his A game, dude's unhittable, literally. But the only way it makes sense is like, hey, can you get a couple prospects, 2 of them which are like basically almost major league ready, so then you can fill the multiple holes that you need to fill, like you did with Juan Soto. You're not going to get that level of talent back for Dylan Cease, but can you get a couple guys, like a back end of rotation starting pitcher, and maybe like a bat that was like major league ready, but that feels like a lot to me. And if you're not getting that, then why trade them?
Yeah, and again, it's like with baseball, it's hard because we're so regionalized. Like, I don't know anything about Brandon Sproat.
What a name.
But he's the top pitching prospect in their organization. The Mets I'm talking about, he might be amazing.
Do you have their top prospects?
Brandon Sproat.
Number 1?
Jet Williams.
That's our top 2 prospects?
I think. I'm looking at the top 100, and they have 2, and those are their 2 in the top 100.
Okay.
So, I mean, listen, Brandon Sproat's on the all-name team.
He's a really good name.
And Jet Williams is on the all-name team, and they're both 20 or 20. No, excuse me. Sproat's 24, and Williams is 21. Listen, that's the thing with baseball. This isn't basketball or football. Like, if you told me right now, dude, that the Niners are trading for Caleb Williams, I know who Caleb Williams is, even out of college. I don't know Brandon Sproat. I didn't watch him pitch in college. So it's a weirder sell, but it may work. I don't know.
I have said this before. I continue to say it. AJ Preller is not going to get, quote unquote, fleeced in any of these deals. He draws a line in the sand, and he has an asking price. And if the asking price is not met, it's not going to happen. Remember back in the day, I don't know if you were here yet, maybe. They traded Brad Hand, a nice closer.
Yeah,
nice closer.
Was it 2017?
I think it was 2017. Maybe. I don't know.
I think it was 2017.
Brad Hand, all-star closer. Team sucked. But he traded him for Francisco Mejia. Francisco Mejia turned out to be nothing.
Catching prospect, yeah.
But at the time, he was like a top prospect in the
in baseball
Cleveland organization.
Yeah.
And you're like, whoa, Francisco Mejia. It was a 1-for-1.
2 months of a closer.
For 2 months of a closer. So if Preller is pulling off those type of deals back in the day, and then, the Juan Soto trade, getting everything that he got back for Juan Soto. Now, in hindsight, you can say that was a lot. Yep. At the time, I was critical of it, like a pitcher and a bunch of whatever, right? But the pitcher turned out to be a damn good pitcher.
And pitching depth with Brito and Vasquez. Those could be starting pitchers.
And you flipped Thorpe for Cease, so it all looked great in the end. Can he do that with Cease or King? I don't know. And even if he can, I still am like, don't do it. Please don't do it. Please don't do it.
70470 started with team. Would you move Michael King or Dylan Cease? Plus Jim's back page here until 6, John and Jim. We're not doing that. Jim's back page is ahead. You want to hear from Jeff Passan?
I do want to hear from Jeff Passan, your boy.
All right. So Jeff Passan, because we've heard people chime in on the state of the Padres organization. We hadn't heard from Jeff Passan. He was out talking baseball today on YouTube, and he had this to say.
There's just been no significant moves to get better.
Right.
And if you're the Padres and you're competing with the Dodgers and the Diamondbacks, you kind of need to get better. Isn't that what the postseason taught you? Like, you can't run it back with what you've got, particularly with some free agents leaving already. And the Padres are in a very unfortunate situation right now because they have got they're getting dinged a couple ways. They've got a nasty fight over ownership of the franchise, which is always the sort of thing that can destabilize the product on the field because, if you don't know where the future ownership is going to go, the likelihood of getting spending okayed is a whole lot lower. And they've also got Dylan Cease and Michael King going into their walk year with Yu Darvish and Joe Musgrove, who's out right now, really being the lone holdovers in that rotation. You can look at Randy Vasquez as well or Matt Waldron, but in reality, those are more back end of the rotation type guys. When you're talking front end starters, Musgrove in his 30s, Darvish in his late 30s, this is not a group of pitchers that's getting any younger, and they've traded away so many of their top end guys, top end prospects that the notion that they are going to suddenly be bringing up this groundswell of pitching from the minor leagues, it's not realistic. And so the Padres, it's a real rock and a hard place right now for them.
One of the first things he said in there is, isn't it like, I forget the exact words, but he's like, hey, isn't the idea that you got to try to compete with the Dodgers and Diamondbacks, teams that are in front of you or, around you that are making moves to win in the postseason?
Yeah, he sounded like you. Isn't the point to try to keep up? Sometimes though we do separate it. We're like, well, you're not going to keep up with the Dodgers offseason moves.
No one is.
But you can at least keep up with yourself.
You can at least.
You kind of need to get better.
You kind of need to get better.
Kind of need to get better, and that's what we have been harping on the entire offseason. Is that coming off of a 93-win year, as close as you were, you're 9 innings away from taking out the Dodgers for the second time in 3 years, moving on to the NLCS. And now it is you taking a perceived step backwards.
Perceived. That's the thing. I mean, it's actually beyond perceived. His Profar's not coming back, and he was a big piece.
As Cespedes Barbecues pointed out, 32 or 34% of all their at-bats last year are not on the team right now.
So that would be Profar and Kim and
Solano and Peralta.
Yeah,
Higashioka.
You basically, you make a good point. I mean, you're down a third of your starters, let's just say. Profar, King, Kim, Higgy is a third of your position players.
Yeah.
You're starting lineup.
And Solano and Peralta got
and that's another half of you're down 3.5 out of 9 spots. And this is why we said they're now top heavy and what happens after the 4th spot in their lineup.
Yeah. And hey, look, if Jake Cronenworth and Xander Bogaerts and Manny Machado and Luis Arraez and Jackson Merrill and Fernando Tatis Jr. all played 155 games next year,
Great.
But the likelihood of that happening is not very high. And even if they did all play 85% of the games next year. What are you going to do with the other 15% on the field that you need to fill those spots when they need rest or if they get injured or, like an everyday shortstop is great, but you also need to make sure you have plan B, C, D ready to go. And right now, plan B, C, D are minor league invites.
I'm going to ask you a question, a serious question.
What are they going to do on June 13th versus the White Sox?
Let's break that every series, obviously.
We're not that show.
Here's what I want to say, okay? First homestand. 4 against Atlanta, 3 against Cleveland. Okay. First road trip. No, it's 4-4.
Oh, nice.
Okay. Is that right? An 8-game homestand? No, 4-3.
Oh, must be nice.
And then 3 against the Cubs where it's going to be like snowing, right? And then 3 in Sacramento at like AAA Park.
Uh-huh.
So 13 games in.
13?
Because their first homestand, their first road trip.
Okay.
What are we going to be saying after those 13 games? Because my basic point is this. I still think they have, I don't think there's anything wrong with their roster. I don't think it's as good right now as it was last year. Okay. Mm-hmm. It's not. I don't think they're on pace. They're going to be projected to win 93 games, but I also don't think it's sky is falling. So, what are we going to be saying after the first homestand, the first road trip? I know what we're going to be saying.
Yeah.
The same thing we always say. Yeah. These games count just like the games in June.
Right.
6 and 7 isn't acceptable. We said it last year, too. Right. So,
it's the same song and dance every year.
Right. I don't think my point is, despite this no good, horrible offseason, I'm not expecting 2-11 out of the gates. I have no reason to assume that.
Yeah, it would be very beneficial for them not to go 2-11 in the first 13 games.
But I already know what we're going to be saying.
What I do think, unless they make moves, and look, there's still a good amount of time left before opening day, so moves can be made. But if not, I do think the overarching conversations that we'll have a lot will be like, man, this team got some holes.
Yeah, during the year, we could be saying that. Yeah.
Like, man, that the production you're getting from XYZ is just awful.
I mean, we say that. I know. You're right. I guess I'd just be like,
hope I'm wrong.
Yeah, I'm cautious right now because I don't know what the finished product looks like. And I think even with some of their departures, they still have a good enough roster. Now, I don't know what that ultimately means, but I think it's good enough. I'd be very surprised if the Padres next year aren't competing for a playoff spot. I hope I'm right in saying that. I'd be surprised if they were just out of it. They're not competing for a playoff spot. That to me would be surprising. I mean, they got to go earn it and do it. But I don't think I'm at a point where I'm like, well, even though this offseason has been horrific, they now can't compete for a playoff spot. No, the offseason has just been bad because you were so close and it doesn't feel like you've gotten closer. It just feels like you've gotten further away.
Yeah, the one thing that I feel good about is Mike Schilt and AJ Preller are like same page, brainwaves. They
spirit animals,
like spirit animals, bro. Spirit bros.
Yeah.
And so there's no drama there, which is like great, unless there is, but I don't know about. But at this moment in time, there's no drama between the two that we know of. So that's good. And coming into year 2 with Melvin, year 2 with Tingler, it was bad. Like players said, this guy to Jace Tingler, and then Melvin and Preller did not get along, and it trickled down to the clubhouse.
Right.
So with going into year 2 of another new manager who just got a contract extension, you're going in with him and the GM on the same page and being as positive as Schulte is. I don't envision this team winning like 72 games next year and like completely falling off a map unless they get a bunch of injuries.
Right. Like most things it's going to come down to like 2 games one way or 2 games the other, right? Is it 83 wins or is it 87? That's 2 off 85. Plus 2 from 85 is 87, minus 2 from 85 is 83. And that's likely what it comes down to in the upcoming season, as simple as that sounds. All right, Jim's back page on the other side here until 6. It's Jon and Jim.